These new stats that we found should excite you as a Habs fan. The average NHL draft pick is more likely than ever to make the NHL, and the Habs are following the trend of teams to pick shorter, higher scoring players, a trend that's been happening for the past 10 years now. We're going to break down all these stats and why it might show that Montreal is poised for one of the most elite rebuilds we have ever seen, so stick around for this edition of Habs Digest. Jesse, I saw these stats today on Twitter, and I'm going to give full credit to the Twitter author of this, because this is crazy. I think it just fits the Habs perfectly, basically. So without any further ado, let's just show some of the stats. The NHL has shown in recent years, you can compare the red line, which is the season end year 2010, the blue line season end year 2017, as in those draft years. Jesse, we can see that even with that extra, 7-10 years experience from the 2010 draft class to make the NHL, the more recent drafts have a much higher likelihood of making the NHL as a whole. But not only that, over the last 10-12 years, the NHL on average, especially as you get towards the end of the first round, the draft picks have been almost a quarter inch shorter on average, as in every draft pick, or every 4 draft picks, is an inch shorter than what they would have picked before. And we're going to discuss this because, to me, this is insane to see this. It's showing that high draft picks are more valuable than ever, and shorter, higher scoring players are more valuable than ever. And I feel like, now that we've seen these stats, we've seen Montreal take this path, but this just reinforces that Montreal has really, really done their rebuild and made their correct draft picks at the exact right time.
And you have to feel like the reason for NHL teams really getting a lot of these draft picks right is because of analytics, right? It's starting to become so important, as we see the Habs are now a little bit late to that party, but now we're really starting to just understand how important that is. And of course, that's affecting even how we're drafting, how we're doing trades, free agency, everything, because we're putting such a more of a premium on speed and skill now ever than in the NHL before. That's really the name of the game. And of course, size still has importance. And even going to last year, how we drafted, that was still part of our philosophy. We said, okay, taking Slafkovsky first, that allows us to maybe go from a little bit more of a skill guy later. So of course, even with the Habs, it still has a place, but they showed the tendency to kind of go for players that have that skill, even though they might not be huge, like Caufield, like Hutson. And I think a lot of us as Habs fans, we would agree, we are happy that we drafted Cole Caufield and Lane Hutson.
Yeah, it's a trend that, I don't want to say the Habs have jumped on this before other teams, but just seeing these plots and seeing where the Habs have drafted these guys, like Cole Caufield slipped more picks than he normally would have because of his stature. Same thing with Lane Hutson, who was drafted in the second round. The Habs are clearly one of the teams that are not afraid to take these risks. They're following that trend of shorter, higher scoring guys, truly providing more value than ever. And if you kind of put these two graphs together, it's not a 100% correlation. You'd have to do some more analyses, but you can infer from these two graphs that the shorter, higher scoring guys are also more likely to make the NHL, at least in the last number of years when these guys are getting picked higher, right? Higher likelihood of a player making the NHL in the last 5 years, in the last 5 drafts. And in all of those drafts, these players have been on average shorter. So it's very, very interesting to see. And of course, like we said, Jesse, size matters in the NHL and maybe in some other places. But, these guys like Juraj Slafkovsky are never going to sort of be out of a job because the average height of a forward is something like 6'1". And we're not saying that everyone you pick should be short, but I just think the rebuild has really gone the right way. And like you said, Lane Hutson, Cole Caufield, Sean Farrell, they are the exact type of player, we've seen this, Jesse, right? We've been talking to all the fans about this for ages. We've seen this trend in the NHL, but now we have stats to back it up. But where this leads me to is now that Montreal has clearly drafted the right way, what does the future look like, right? Now that they have picked these guys that are fitting the exact NHL trend, the exact, perfect trend for what you want a rebuild to be, is there a potential for this to be an elite rebuild? Jesse, looking into next year, the Atlantic Division is stacked. We'll get into an article in a second, but based on who the Habs have already, aren't you just extremely excited, especially with these stats and potentially another good pick next year, to see what they can do with it?
It's true. I think everything in life that often takes a little bit longer to do. Let's say you're cooking something, you got a nice steak on the grill. It's sometimes nice. You want to put that at low heat. You want to let that simmer, kind of marinate a little bit. It's kind of the same with an NHL club. If you want to really have that long-term success, often you need to take your time, do it once, but kind of do it right. So it's with the Habs next year, I'm totally okay with us doing a little bit better than next year. But if we're still getting, like, let's say we land at 10, we get the 10th overall draft pick, I'm going to be so happy with that because I find that's going to be such a nice balance where we're going to improve, but we're probably still going to get a good draft pick, which I'm totally on board for. I would say next year, let's do better, but let's still get a good draft pick. After that pick, all bets are off. Now we're gunning. We're going to be more active in free agency, and we're really going to be making a play to really compete for the Stanley Cup because this is what it's all about. But it's a hard thing to do, right? You need to take your time. You need to take your shot when it's the right moment, right? So I think being patient about it, but when it's the right time, then being aggressive is probably the best strategy.
I think that's kind of what they did, right? They made that push to the Cup final, and they had to shut their veterans down, and they said, fine, we're going rebuild mode, and they did it right at the right time, as draft picks are becoming more likely to make the NHL, as their guys who they had already drafted, right, and even guys who they drafted in the future are fitting these NHL trends and proving to be solid prospects, especially when you look at someone like Lane Hutson or Sean Farrell, for that matter. It's amazing. Now, let's take a look at this article from Marc Dumont, because people often ask him, and even ask us, where are the Habs going to land in the standings next year? Well, it's not very easy. The first thing they must establish is that other than the Red Wings, every team in the Atlantic Division is poised to challenge for a playoff spot. Of course, that includes the Senators, the Sabres, the Bruins, the Lightning, the Leafs. So a lot of great teams in the Atlantic Division, not to mention the Florida Panthers. So it's just like, it's a crazy stacked division. And on top of this, even though the Red Wings are one of the only teams that you're kind of looking at saying maybe they're not ready for a playoff push, there have been so many talks with Alex DeBrincat, and adding him could be huge, and they're showing that they're kind of losing patience, especially with the waiving of Philip Zadina to terminate his contract. They want to go in now. So, Jesse, I think there's a world where the Habs finish between 6 and 8 in the Atlantic Division, but I like to think of this as a win-win. If you end up outperforming expectations and finishing higher in the standings than a team like Detroit or Ottawa or Buffalo, you say that's a huge success because your core team, who's all like under 23, 24 years old, made that kind of push and that kind of progress so fast. And if they finish 8th, if they have another year where they struggle, maybe there's some injuries, guess what? You get another draft pick in what's going to be a decent draft class next year with a chance at a really good player at the top. And it's just like, in Celebrini, like, I feel like this is just a win-win, Jesse. I feel like everything is just falling in the Habs' favor, and I feel like I just can't wait to see them 2-3 years from now.
It is a win-win, and of course, this is going to depend so much on health. I feel like the Habs have had a better team than they've shown after the 2 last seasons, but really injuries, that injury bug has just really kind of derailed us quite a bit. So I'm really looking forward to us, being a healthier team. We have taken tangible kind of steps to correct that and bringing in some new staff, everything else. So I'm curious to see where that will kind of affect us, but I see a world where a healthy team is kind of competing with the Sabres, with the Sens, obviously with the Red Wings, for sure, and probably punching a little bit above their weight. I think there's still going to be some learning curves with a young team, but like you said, it's going to be a win-win really anyway. But I think almost on purpose, Kent Hughes wants to take the slow approach on this. As you see, he's not super active in free agency. He's not trying to make the move right now. I think it's about being patient. Even if that, we don't end out the best next year, it's going to put us in the best position in the future.
And I think that's the one thing that hurts rebuilds the most is trying to rush it. These things take time. I mean, if you don't mind me using a cross-sport analogy, someone like the Baltimore Orioles in baseball, they tanked for years. Now they have one of the best prospect pools we've ever seen, calling up a top prospect almost every week, it feels like. And, there's a lot of teams who do it the right way and some teams that try to rush. And it really feels like Kent Hughes is not on the market to rush this at all. He knows it's Nick Suzuki's team. He's leading the young guys, and hopefully in 3-4 years, this team will be a true contender. But that'll do it for this edition of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Let us know what you thought about this video, about these stats, and let us know what your thoughts are on the Habs rebuild status. I'm Josh Gosse for my co-host Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.